Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin, and we're happy to be your guides for this limited series.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Join us on this journey to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters.
Well, we are really excited to be back in Nashville, and we're talking with my friend Mark Cleveland. Mark is somebody who brings a wealth of business experience. Mark is a multiple award-winning CEO. He's been the CEO of the year in Nashville. He's been one of the most admired CEOs for really 2 decades now at this point. And so we're really excited to have you on the show, Mark. Thanks for being with us.
Gosh, it's a privilege.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One of the things that, I know is it, and we're going to hear a little bit about, but you have been in really a range of industries. And so we're going to talk about that, about how you pursued quality and everything from compression gear for triathletes to transatlantic, freight shipping. I mean, just wildly different things, and found success in those areas. But right now, your latest venture is that you've sort of pivoted to this thing that you've kind of given a new name. And I wonder if you would just introduce us to this concept of parallel entrepreneurship.
I'd be thrilled. It really started as a reflection of my own lived experience. I've started and sold 6 companies in 6 different industries over my career. And today, my day job is that I help entrepreneurs realize the optimum outcome of their decision to sell their company. And so I do sell side representation. But the reason I do that is because I've been on their side of the desk so many times. And my lived experience as an entrepreneur, I was entrepreneur of the year in Nashville. And then 10 years ago, I started to get this identity of being a serial entrepreneur. People would apply that, and I'd say, wow, that's kind of cool.
Meaning multiple time entrepreneur, not like cereal that you eat for breakfast.
Yeah, not like, but one after another is the implication, right? It's lining up and trying to make things like living a big, bold life in series. And I live a big, bold life in parallel. And I think that we all do. We have a divinity, an absolute unlimited potential in each one of us. And yet so many things in life tell us to just be one thing, focus on one thing, do one thing. And entrepreneurship tends to consume you. And then if you're good at it, you do maybe another one. And so now you're a serial entrepreneur, and that all works. But the way that I did it was simultaneously owning between 3 and 4 companies at the same time, and all at different stages of development because they interested me. And that's parallel entrepreneurship for people like us who live, like all of us, who live really in a parallel universe. If you stop thinking about it as separate and more as synergy. So I'm looking for the synergies from business A to business B to business C. And each learning experience I have in business A applies to business B in some way or another, because business is business is business. And for this conversation, quality is quality. So quality in manufacturing Swiftwick socks, or quality in manufacturing Ellsworth handcrafted bicycles, or quality in on-time departure and delivery for a cross-Gulf maritime operation, or today, quality in delivering a conversation on a podcast called The Parallel Entrepreneur. These are things that excite me, motivate me, and I hope I'm delivering a good quality product.
Yeah, and it's tremendous. I think we're going to learn a lot today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I have to know, when you think of quality and your definition of quality, what are some big, major either life events or perspectives that you hold to be true that inform your definition of quality?
Yeah, I believe that we should all consume fewer of higher quality things
Okay.
because our universe has
Hmm.
some limits. Whether you believe in one definition of a limit or another, there are some constraints, and we don't need to have 75 plastic toys. We don't need to have socks that wear out. So for me, that thing that brought it home for me was trying to start a company from scratch,
Mhm.
and what would our values and our mission and our vision look like, and how could we become a thought leader, a brand of significance in a category that didn't exist, and be an environmentally friendly company
Hmm.
in an industry, the textile industry, which is the second most polluting industry in the world. So behind petrochemicals, you have textiles.
Mhm.
And I didn't know anything about textiles, not a thing, when we started that company from scratch. But I knew there was a competitive advantage in quality. And I knew, ultimately discovered, that for every black thread there is out there, it started out as white.
Yeah.
98% of all textiles are white. So when you add a color to that, it's like an apple, and it's got a red skin on the outside, but it's white on the inside. And if you manufacture your raw materials in a different way, it would be closer to a carrot. It's orange all the way
Through
through.
and through. Yeah.
So that product doesn't wear, it doesn't look like it wears, it doesn't get wear marks,
Wow.
right? And I don't use any water in the application of the color to the white fabric. So for every pound of textiles that you color blue, that's 15 gallons of water that has to be consumed and processed and dealt with. And some people don't deal with it well. We just refused to participate in that part of the supply chain, and it forced us to make different business
Hmm.
decisions. And so we, in this one example of Swiftwick, which I think is formative, we decided that we would only do what's called solution dyed raw materials so that the color was in the solution and black was black all the way through. That also allowed us to focus on more quality elements regarding the structures that are the fabrics and uh, how they wick moisture and the technology. And we just dove right hard into the technology with, again, starting a company from scratch. You don't have any legacy behaviors to
Hmm.
pull forward. You can just do the best from the very beginning. So I think those are the lessons that I pulled out of that.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Of course, our podcast, Quality Matters, is in the space of education, but so much of what you're saying makes, the connection. We're able to draw the connection between the different industries in which you're working and education. The leading thought that I'm having as you just gave those great examples is this idea of the quality of the parts and the quality of the strategy or the procedure that goes into creating this product oftentimes results with a higher quality product itself, which I think is very transferable to
Hmm.
education. If you're going to break down the dynamic parts of what it looks like to educate a child or create a school. When you make sure that you're really addressing and ensuring quality in those little pieces of it, the end result, what the child is learning and how they're being educated, hopefully is as high quality as the different
Mhm.
components that make it up.
I wonder, Mark, do you feel like, particularly in the example that you were giving about Swiftwick, it's textiles, and disclaimer, have owned and continue to own a lot of Swiftwick products, and so there's your product placement, yeah, and it's high quality stuff and it's great stuff. Do you feel like you had to educate consumers on quality, or were
Hmm.
you responding to a sort of demand for quality, or maybe a little bit of both? How do you think about that?
Oh, great question. I think interestingly, we attacked a marketplace where people have low expectations
Okay.
for their socks,
Okay.
low expectations for their underwear.
That,
And
by the way,
we,
sounds a lot like education sometimes. So
For
we're going to come
sure.
back to that. But yeah,
Right.
yeah.
so we went in and said, we're going to make the world's best product. And that ultimately spoke for itself. But we did have to educate people because they recognized it was a world-class experience. The socks don't wear out. This 3 years later, you're putting those socks on, they feel just like they did when you first put them on. We
Yeah.
don't have those experiences. So customers recognized quality when they experienced it. And then we would reinforce that with education about how did we do it? Because they became curious. They wanted to learn more. This is not just limited to Swiftwick. At Ellsworth Handcrafted Bicycles, we manufactured high quality mountain bikes and road bike frames in the United States. And I had a chance to set up that manufacturing facility. And in some of these examples, the high quality customer comes to you
Hmm.
because they know a lot about what they want and why. And in other cases, you're trying to take somebody from maybe a mid market they couldn't afford, they couldn't reach
Yep.
for that higher quality product that they are educating themselves about and
Yep.
they're on their way. And then other cases, you're just trying to explain why it matters. And that's a lot of energy to try to explain why it matters. So I think, you know, I'm fortunate to have been surrounded by a lot of really smart people in all these companies that helped us figure out what is the value, what is the thing that resonates with the consumer that's experiencing this. And let's just be true to that as long as we possibly can, or let's not do it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that really resonates, and I think it's helpful to kind of segment out the audiences a little bit. Some folks may need to just kind of ramp up in their knowledge for what they're looking for, and I think in the education context, we're now living in this environment with increased education choice, right? Parents have way more choices available to their children than was the case when they were kids, right? That's almost a fact in every state, um, to greater or lesser degree. But that doesn't mean you know how to navigate that system. It doesn't mean you even know what
Hmm.
questions to ask, right? And that you're necessarily able to identify quality. That being said, there are also those trusted individuals, I think, in every community that you look to and you say, "Hey, how did you make that decision?" Right? And they can tell you that we all know the person who's got a hobby, maybe it's cycling or whatever, and if you make the mistake of getting into a conversation with that person, they're going to tell you everything about that the thing they're
Bless their
passionate
heart.
about. Bless their heart. I'm often that guy, right? And so we're seeing some of that in education, but we're trying to like now do it for 60 million kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Something that you just said, although I'm going to take it in a different direction,
sure.
mistakes. I have to imagine that you've made some or you've experienced some. You've obviously had a tremendous amount of success, either in spite of, because of, or in some relation to them. But what does it look like when, in any of your endeavors, you've made mistakes or you've stumbled into situations that were less than ideal? How do you turn those experiences into something that allows you to be successful, or how do you walk through those?
Wow. Well, my mom was a special education teacher
Okay.
and my dad was a lawyer. And the gift they gave me was that I can do anything. And I really took that into my identity. I can do anything I want to do.
Hmm.
And so can you, and so can you, and so can
Hmm.
you. So taking self limiting beliefs off the table is the first step. Second, I think I've made so many mistakes because I keep on trying.
Hmm.
And everything is a mistake compared to what, right? And so I'm out there doing something and trying to push myself into a new learning environment where I am not relying on all my old notes and my old patterns and the things that I've got down pat. That's boring.
Hmm.
I can take that and outsource it. I can take that and give it to a more competent human who can do a better job than I was able to put those rear view mirror dots together. I value that because I can accomplish it and I can see it, and then I can perhaps stop doing it in order to make room, space for
Hmm.
something else to come in that requires all my skills and talents and my willingness to make mistakes and my willingness to move forward. I think it's believing that you can do anything, not spending a lot of time with self-limiting beliefs. What I tried 2 years ago works this year. What I started 3 years ago that worked great isn't working today.
Hmm.
And I think it's our ability to be flexible and non-judgmental
Hmm.
Of
of
ourselves?
ourselves
Mm.
first that allows us to be the beacon, be the light for others who might believe that they could do it or want to do it, but have some limiting belief. I think we have to take the limits off ourselves first and uh, find, gosh, I would say find the joy in being inspired.
That's good. You're such a happy warrior, which is why I love when we, every time we connect. Um, I want to go back to this idea of parallel entrepreneurship. How do you think about working maybe in different domains, right? Kind of maybe pursuing, let's call it dual tracks, right? You've got two different business ideas or what have you that you're pursuing, and doing both of them to sort of execute at a high level. Because one of the things that I think Caitlin and I have seen in the education space is that very often, say a school district, we would say is trying to do too much. And where we would go, hey, guys, you got to get one thing right. Like do one thing well before you think about moving on to 12 or 13 or 14. How do you think about having the right sort of mixture so that you're not getting so much incoming that it's untenable?
Mm. Paralleling is an important word. It's in the dictionary. It's almost never used. I love that word and I'm going to resurrect it. Paralleling is the act of doing everything that interests you and looking for synergies, synchronizations. What can I test in this environment that I don't have an opportunity to test in this environment, but I can take the learning and the outcome and apply it over here?
Great.
So if I'm doing everything in serial, if I'm only getting good at one thing at a time, then I don't have any other environment to test in. And if I'm only moving straight forward, I don't have any other relationship to compare to. And frankly, I've got lots of experiences where I tried something and it didn't work. And then later on, I tried it again with a different teammate and a different circumstance, and the markets are different. And all of a sudden it works and I look like a genius, but I actually failed the first time.
Yeah.
So I think it goes back to the premise that we ever have enough resources to do any one thing perfectly, that we only have resources to do something as well as we can. That has to be okay in certain circumstances, at least in my opinion. And I'm going to invest time and energy in one enterprise or one relationship when I get synergies and another party on the other side of that relationship engaging with me. And if I'm just the only guy reaching out, well, then I don't have a relationship. So I'm not learning anything. So I can't continue to invest in that. But I never fire my friend. They're just not available at this moment in time. It's a season, right? So I'm getting a little deep there, but I'm trying to point at these things are reciprocal. Life is a reciprocating situation. It's not just that I want to be an apple. I want to be the apple tree. And maybe I want to be the orchard. And maybe I want to be the farmer that takes care of that product. And maybe I want to be the guy who transports it to the marketplace where it can be nourishing and humans can flourish because it's available to them. You have to look at things in terms of ecosystems, in my opinion. A business is a biology. It is an ecosystem. It's never any straight thing. And the straighter we get and the more we try to be in line and in series, and, the harder it is to find joy in the outcome.
Are there any specific qualities that you look for in these ecosystems that would make you either say, yes, this is something that I want to move closer towards, or, oh, this ecosystem is exhibiting something that makes me want to go in a different direction?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Positivity, approaching a challenge with a collaborative, curious mind, as opposed to approaching a topic with a combative, separating us versus them
Sort
kind
of
of a,
defensive posture.
yeah.
Yeah.
You called me a happy warrior earlier, which I'm just so grateful for. I've tried to look at my own identity, which I've given myself over time or taken on a label from somebody else, and then it became real because I made it so. this warrior mentality, which I have those skills, but I would rather see myself as a guardian
Hmm.
than a warrior. Same skills. I just walk around differently.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think the more we can be guardians of our children's best interests and guardians of systems that don't necessarily fit for me, but might fit for you, guardians of opportunity, then I think we are really contributing.
Let me ask, as our time, on this episode of Quality Matters is kind of winding down, I'm curious about one of the things that you engaged in Nashville was Nashville's push to enhance and hopefully improve the transit and traffic situation. I know it's something that you cared about. It's also something that in the private sector you founded a company that kind of like a ride sharing sort of carpooling and tech platform company. So you've come at this, tried to crack this nut because everybody knows that traffic in Nashville is terrible, and it's going to be worse by the time that this episode airs than it is even today, right? Um, but that I don't know if that was your first foray into the sort of public policy and advocacy space. What kind of lessons might you draw from that? Because it's such a
Wow.
different thing. There's so many, I think, variables that are maybe outside your locus of control, right? I'd love to know if there's a few takeaways from that you gleaned.
Well, bravery is important.
Hmm.
And my investors who contributed, their energy, trust, and funds to help us accomplish what we did accomplish. The Greater Nashville Regional Council's bravery in trying to approach things differently. Um, I think also trauma is a word that
Hmm.
occurs to me. You can die on that hill, and people are not thinking about the consequences of the decisions that we make every day to drive our Escalade downtown alone by itself, by yourself. We don't do enough trip planning. We don't think of our mobility as the direct relationship between my mobility and your mobility is a direct relationship between our economic success.
Hmm.
So that if we don't bring a lot of people along with us and they can't get to work, can't afford a car, there's just this sort of insane idea that a minimum wage is a wage that's acceptable. And you can't live in Nashville and support a family or grow or do anything on subsistence wages. We are just not approaching the solution correctly, and I don't think we're approaching the problem correctly. But little bits are taking root. This may be one of those examples where I fail and have to surrender. Um, it's been a challenge. I've been on the Hill advocating for something that makes sense, and I've watched really, really good ideas die for political reasons. I've watched
Yeah.
brave people try to advocate for something and have it get disassembled for soundbite kinds of reasons that make me think that people are just not thinking. And then I think the facts of everything around us about how we move and how we could move and how we could be a bigger, better city that we're going to be, whether we like it or not. And I guess I'll leave you with this thought. I believe that Nashville is going to never actually solve its traffic problem,
Hmm.
and that autonomous vehicles can't get here fast enough for us not to suffer for the next 10 years, that transit won't happen fast enough, broad enough, and that outsourcing our interstates to private enterprise for $5 billion in a 10 or 15-year project won't solve the mobility issue between Murfreesboro and Nashville, let
Hmm.
alone the increasing mobility challenges that we have. So I'm going to be advocating for us to look at the traffic problems we have in Nashville as a competitive advantage. You're
I
in
see.
motion. You can educate yourself in that half an hour to an hour to an hour and a half commute.
Hmm.
You can get yourself ready to move into that employer environment with the right programming and have a collaborative attitude when you arrive. And then after a hard day at work, you can find your Zen place to come to home and interface with your family and
Hmm.
your friends and your home network. And then I think if we don't have traffic, we have either a pandemic or we have no employment, right?
Mhm.
If we do have traffic, We have just limits of what this back to constraints. We have a limit of what we can afford. And an 8-lane highway doesn't solve the problem, or LA wouldn't look like LA. So this is about people deciding to share rides in long distance commutes and building community and awareness and education and intentionally programming themselves to arrive at work more collaborative and productive, to get home more available,
Mm-hmm.
and use that transit time, whatever vehicle you're in. Try to get somebody else in that vehicle, because you can cut traffic in half. So I would say to the governor, if you have $1 billion that you want to spend on something, give it to the people instead who share rides, and we will cut traffic in half tomorrow. It's not very difficult to imagine that if you pay people an incentive,
Incentivize
if you
it.
give them an incentive, they will do what's best for them, or they will at least chase the incentive.
Yeah.
And we can solve a lot of problems with that mindset. I think incentives rule the world. And I just think that we're not incentivizing the right behaviors.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Super interesting. There's so much of, again, what you're saying that I think is applicable to the world of education. You've got such hope in how you speak about the challenges and addressing
you.
them. And I know that Shaka and I will have a really great conversation as we do our breakdown episode and talk about what we learned from you and all that you've shared with us. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. In a parallel universe, I can't think of any two people I'd rather come up beside.
It was great.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
Thank you.
Thanks a ton.
All right, Shaka, another really interesting conversation in Nashville with Mark Cleveland.
Yep.
I thought so much of what he was saying, it was so hopeful. There was a lot of
Yeah.
optimism in how he looks at situations, successes, and challenges. There's a lot of hope in what he's trying to accomplish, or maybe the better way to say that is he is trying to accomplish a lot because he feels hopeful
Yeah.
for what he can do with those accomplishments. Does anything stick out, or better, again,
Sure.
a better question, what sticks out?
Yeah, several things stick out. I mean, that hope that he evidenced, just want to kind of shout out to his parents, because it sounds like a lot of that
Yep.
started with them. He said his mom was a special ed teacher, his dad was a lawyer, and they kind of instilled in him this idea that he could do anything.
Yep.
And then he sort of said, and so can you, and so can you, and so can you.
Mhm.
And yeah, what a beautiful thing that is. And I have to say, I think that that's true of most parents, right?
Mhm.
Most parents, I can speak as a parent, you see your children and you go, all right, you can be anything you want to be. And that's kind of part of the American dream,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, it restores your faith. If you lost it, restores your faith in kind of positive parenting and just
Yeah.
the power that parents can be. I guess maybe the one thing the place I want to start is this concept of parallel entrepreneurship
Mhm.
and sort of really paralleling.
Mhm.
You know, that was a concept that I know is going to be new to a lot of people.
Mhm.
I liked how he talked about it's more than just being a serial entrepreneur and
Yep.
sort of doing things in series, but how you can be doing thing A and thing B, but being really intentional about identifying lessons that you're learning from thing A and applying them to thing B and
Right.
vice versa, and kind of having that information share. And boy, would I love to see that in the education space.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear him talk about as he's engaging in all these different types of work, sold 6 different businesses in 6 different industries. Many of those he was operating at the same time. And he kind of does what we're doing with our podcast, or I'm
Yeah.
sort of extrapolating, but he uses these different sectors, these different professions, these differences to leverage the work he's doing in one of the specific industries and in one of the specific lanes. A lot of the conversations we have, the intention behind why we ask
Mhm.
people outside of the education space to come and chat with us
Mhm.
is because we can actively, with intention, with intent, go and learn from other people who are doing different things and then apply their lessons to our worlds of education.
Yep.
And that's similar to what he was explaining and what he does, which is engage in these different lines of work, see where he can learn some different things. And then it's kind of a little bit of try this here if it doesn't fit because the environment's not right or the opportunities aren't sort of aligned. Well, then he tries it in a different lane.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Mm-hmm.
was the one that said, sometimes that makes success. So I think it's really interesting that
Yep.
he's sort of living this, the embodiment of sort of what we're trying to do with these conversations
Yeah.
by really being intentional about learning from different people and different places
Yeah.
and what we can apply.
Yeah. What's your experience thinking about kind of your teaching days and maybe even friends of yours who may still be in the classroom or kind of in schools? Um, what's your sense for how much of that, say, information sharing and like best practice
Mhm.
sharing is happening across schools?
Okay. Well, I have a perfect example for this
Okay.
because I didn't see it happening at all when I was a teacher and in
Okay.
schools. So when I was no longer a teacher, we started these education meetups
Oh yeah. Yeah.
because I was curious. People had to have been feeling what I was feeling, which is like I passed two different schools when I would drive from my house to where I taught. And I had no idea what was
What's
going on at
happening
the other
there?
two schools. And I passed by them every single day.
Yeah.
I would meet, people at a conference who were teaching at schools all over the country, and I would have a quick chat, but it wasn't like a deep information sharing session.
Yeah.
And so when I started education meetups, the whole premise was, you know, me thinking to myself, I can't be the only one that's curious. And I wasn't the only one that was curious. Everybody is interested in what other people are doing,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're teaching at different schools or someone, has started an ed tech company or someone's a policymaker in the space of education. Everybody is thirsty for sort of this understanding and awareness of what others are challenged by,
Mm-hmm.
what others are being and having success with. So we had a lot of really powerful conversations where people were sharing what they're
Yeah.
working on. We of course framed it, and I think this is where people get too comfortable with this idea of complaining or this is what I'm struggling with and sort of focusing too much on that. Our rule was the conversations have to be solution oriented. So if you're
Yeah.
not bringing
Yeah.
something to the conversation that can be a solution or that can be viewed as a opportunity to create a solution, then it's not,
Yep.
this isn't the place for it.
Yep.
So to answer your question, I didn't see a lot of it when I was a teacher. I saw a little bit more of it when I was at the Department of Education, but that's because we were making them. We were
Mm-hmm.
creating those conversations. We were seeking out those opportunities. But then at Conde Consulting, we found that that was actually a huge
Mm-hmm.
interest point for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different people.
Yeah, it's I mean, I'll tell you where I think it is happening, where I see it. I think there's so much energy in this micro school movement.
Mm,
That's where I see a lot of
I
the
agree.
information sharing, right? Because there also doesn't seem to be the same kind of entrenched um sort of entrenched like expertise where folks are
Yeah,
maybe want to be private about their little fiefdom.
right.
It's it's a movement that seems much more open where folks are saying, "Hey, I'm educating these 22 children
Yeah,
or 12 children.
yeah,
Of course, I want to be as great as I can and deliver a service as
yeah.
that's the best possible. So, yeah, anything you can tell me that would enhance that, like I'm all ears."
Yeah, it's almost like there's this unapologetic nature for what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, which sort of makes them more available to feedback and
Yep.
sharing and stuff like that. Because you're right. I totally agree with you. I see in some of the most robust conversations and exchanging of ideas in the education space, I find to be also in these new emerging school model forums.
Mm-hmm.
And largely that is targeted around this micro school movement.
Yeah, and it's also speaks to something else that Mark talked about a little bit related to how he pursues quality. You asked him a question, I think, like, is there? I don't think you said a North Star, but is there a kind of singular direction or something that you pursue?
Mm-hmm.
What are the attributes of quality
Mm-hmm.
across these
Right,
different
right.
industries and whatnot? And he talked a little bit about, well, let's have some high expectations
Mm-hmm.
as well. And man, that's something that I think we could do whole show certainly about low expectations. This is something that George W. Bush used to talk about, the soft bigotry of low expectations in our public schools,
Yeah.
and that those expectations, I think, persist, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I know we just spoke about this before, but it's like what Dr. Ashley Berner said. She was discussing that that's it's this huge epidemic of setting low expectations for students, and then that's the highest that they go.
Yeah,
It's to a low bar.
yeah,
And what would happen if we actually increased the expectations and raised them so that students, even if they're not, meeting these incredibly high expectations, they're not being fenced in by a low bar.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I had the same thought while he was sharing that, while he was sharing some of his thoughts about how it relates to conversations that we've had with other people who have pointed this specific thing out. Also with Gerard Robinson, when he was sharing with us sort of his work with the prisons in the prison system, something that he said that I found very applicable to this conversation with Mark was this idea of they in the prison system, people are trying to learn because it's self-directed, it's self-motivated.
Right.
And if you have low expectations, you're not going to be self-motivated because you're thinking everybody isn't expecting much from you. But then you listen to someone like Mark talk, and he's all about this idea of not being defined by what other people are telling him, but choosing to, define himself by how he feels. And I found myself thinking about those other two conversations and what it
Hmm.
would be like if all three of them were in a conversation together, and
Hmm.
how schools would benefit and teachers would benefit, specifically teachers, I think, and probably school leaders, from listening to those three conversations and how those three in particular talk about the ways they have had success because of the ways people have encouraged them.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I wish Mark would sort of say, or yeah, that he could say, um, even more directly to some of the policymakers that we've worked with in
Mhm.
the past, certainly at AFC that we work with on education, choice issues, is this idea that you've got to keep learning
Mm,
about what's happening in other sectors, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's just evident from Mark that he is really interested in seeking out new information,
Yep.
right? He said that he got into the textile business
Mm,
knowing nothing about textiles.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's not all that dissimilar from lawmakers. Like, lawmakers at the state level, most of them have not been lawmakers. They
Hmm.
were, running whatever business they were doing, and
Right.
they got elected, and maybe they're public service minded, whatever, but they don't necessarily know a whole lot about a $1 billion, education budget, or
Hmm.
$4 or $10 billion education budget. Um, but I think too many of them get in those positions, and they think that all they need to do is increase the budget number
Mm,
by
mm,
8% a year, and that's doing something.
yeah.
And I would say, I would really encourage lawmakers to be curious about what education reform strategies are really moving the needle for kids
Yeah.
in other states. And, like, let's do some of that. Don't just be satisfied with, in some ways, being like a serial lawmaker.
Completely. It makes me think of what it would be like if everybody was applying the same way Mark lives his life and does his business, the same approach we are taking to this podcast series. If everybody was trying to actively go out and find other people who disagreed with them, who are doing something totally different, having conversations, but their focus as they approach the conversation is what can I learn
Yeah.
and apply? Like,
Yeah.
it's not open-ended because the goal from the conversation that they're hopefully engaging in is what are they going to do differently? What is going to modify their practice? What's going to inform the way they're doing something
Mm-hmm.
because of this conversation with someone who's doing something different, who thinks differently, whatever it is? How are they going to adjust their workings
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
reflect that?
Yeah, that curiosity, I think, is really laudable
Yeah,
that
I
Mark's
agree.
got. I wish we saw more of it in the K-12 space. Last thing that I wanted to mention is right at the end, we were having this conversation. You can tell Mark is very passionate about Nashville traffic.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us who live in Nashville are.
Mm-hmm.
Nashvillians, like probably people in most cities, we all think that our traffic is the worst.
Worst.
And we're all right, of course, somehow. And everybody else's drivers are the worst also.
Yeah, right.
But Mark has spent a lot of time thinking about transit solutions. And he basically said, hey, you know what we could do? We could take a bunch of the money that maybe we're going to spend on a new transit issue or a new lane expansion or whatever, and we could actually try to incentivize different practices by distributing it to people. Sounds a whole lot like education freedom.
Yes, I had the same thought.
That we talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know anybody who's going to argue with the fact that incentives work.
Incentives matter.
Incentives matter. Oftentimes we find that people are incentivized by the wrong things, or maybe they're incentivized by something that's more self-driven, focused. But yeah, I thought that his idea, what it does is that it puts the consumer, or it puts the stakeholder in a position to make a decision between two things, and they're going to have to decide what takes the priority.
That's right.
And as soon as you're in a situation where you're deciding between two things, which takes precedent, you find out so much about people, about what motivates them, about their circumstances, and that's when you can end up making a different decision. If people, as Mark was sharing, if he is able to, bring this to fruition and incentivize people to ride share, if people don't take the incentive, then that's not the priority for them.
Right.
And you will know very quickly that, in fact, adding more lanes to the highway is necessary.
Is the way to do it, yeah.
If you apply that same thing to education, if you incentivize parents and make it possible for them to have more choice in the schools that they're choosing, depending on which schools they're choosing, you'll find out very quickly what their priorities are.
100% agree. We're going to learn something, right?
We're going to learn something.
When people have meaningful choice, we learn something. And the something that we might learn is that they actually were really satisfied with, say, their neighborhood school.
Right.
But we don't actually have an ecosystem that allows that kind of thing in a lot of places, right? I was looking at some Baltimore data recently, like single-digit number of students are proficient in reading and math in Baltimore high schools. Yeah. Not percentages, like you can actually go around and point to the number of children, right? It's just unconscionable.
Mm-hmm.
But those families don't have meaningful choice.
Right.
So what would happen if we did that? We would learn real quick that parents don't have to have a doctorate in education policy to know whether or not this or that is working for their children. They can figure this out.
It just makes me think of people who are in a position to not allow others to benefit from school choice, but they themselves make the choice every single day. I'd be curious, I'm always curious to have conversations with people in that specific position. You find out a lot when you have a choice. But we could talk about Carrie McDonald's example in the grocery store.
Yep.
Like that is just how life works.
Yeah.
And it's a bunch of different choices, and you have to decide which one you're comfortable making and which one you're going to pursue.
Yeah. Well, I maybe we'll close with this. I'd love to know, folks, kind of thinking about this concept of paralleling, parallel entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
I'd love for folks to know, like, what's a lesson maybe from your own industry, from your own sort of, whether it's business sector, even personal life, or even hobbies, right? What's a lesson that you think could be immediately applicable in the education space?
Yeah.
Kind of inviting folks to do the work that we do on this podcast a little bit and dream with us, right? But what's something that we could take from, maybe you're in healthcare, maybe you're in textiles or whatever.
Yeah.
What's something that we could apply in K-12 education immediately?
There's got to be a lot out there.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Shaka.
Yeah, always good to talk.